Hello and welcome to TVP World News. I'm your host, Diana Skaya. Ukrainian media has recently reported on a plot by Russian mercenary group Wagner in which an attack on an American pipeline in West Africa was to take place. Now, the alleged assault was supposed to happen in 2021, with one of the potential targets being oil pipelines belonging to a multinational American energy corporation, Chevron. Retired Russian officers were supposed to take part in a number of attacks on foreign infrastructure facilities in West Africa. Now, as the report states, a Russian group was in contact with a number of armed gangs in West Africa, including Ansaru, an al-Qaeda affiliate in Nigeria, to mount a joint attack on Western oil companies operating in Nigeria's Niger Delta. The revelations draw upon leaked emails from the ex-leader of the Russian paramilitary company, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who was killed in an air crash in 2023. It's too early to talk about exact numbers, said the spokesperson of Ukraine's foreign ministry about the possibility of foreign troops being stationed in Ukraine as part of a potential peace deal with Russia. Now, these comments follow Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's statement earlier this week that at least 200,000 European peacekeepers could be part of such a security guarantee.
Yes, the discussion is ongoing about the contingents, the military contingents of foreign powers, foreign nations that can be potentially deployed to Ukraine. This discussion is in its very early stages, and right now we see the media discussion about the numbers, the exact numbers. But in fact, in real negotiations and talks, it's too early to talk about exact numbers. From Ukraine's point of view, foreign military contingents can be a part of security guarantees for Ukraine, but not the only part, not the only element. This can be an element in the system of security guarantees for Ukraine, and the aim of those guarantees should be one and main aim is to prevent Russia from attacking Ukraine again.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is ready to negotiate a deal with Vladimir Putin. At least that's according to Donald Trump, who, when speaking from the Oval Office, said that from what he's heard, Putin is eager to meet. Trump also said that his team will organize a summit as soon as possible.
I think they have a lot of power over Russia, so I think Russia should want to make a deal. Maybe they want to make a deal. I think from what I hear, Putin would like to see me, and we'll meet as soon as we can. I'd meet immediately. Every day we don't meet, soldiers are being killed on a battlefield. And that battlefield is like no battlefield since World War.
In an interview with Fox News last night, the U.S. president also said that Volodymyr Zelenskyy is, quote, no angel and shouldn't have allowed this war to happen. Speaking at a press conference in Davos about the upcoming talks between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski warned the U.S. president that the Russian leader has changed since Trump dealt with him during his first term.
There are politicians who believe in personal diplomacy, and sometimes it brings results. However, the classic diplomatic art is different. First, the lower levels discuss and establish the details of the agreement, and then the leaders ratify the agreements made at lower levels. Both approaches are justified. I would just like to warn President Trump that this Putin is different than the one he dealt with during his first term of office. This Putin started a full-scale war in Europe and is guilty of war crimes.
Calling for negotiations is akin to pleading for them, according to Jan Brzezinski, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Brzezinski, who also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Europe and NATO policy in President George W. Bush's administration, also said that in the eyes of Vladimir Putin, it's like waving a white flag.
My question to you is, has Mr. Trump underestimated Mr. Putin's obstinacy?
Possibly. He probably thought during the campaign this would be easier, attaining a just peace would be easier to achieve than what he's now realizing. Now, I agree with Kasparov. I'm uncomfortable with President Trump, calling for a deal. When you plead for a deal, when you call for negotiations, in the eyes of Putin, that's akin to pleading. It's akin to waving a white flag. Trump and our NATO allies need to kind of get into Putin's mindset. That's the mindset of a former Soviet KGB officer who thinks in Soviet terms, who thinks in terms of the correlation of forces. Trump's strategy should be maximum pressure, changing the correlation of forces so that Russia comes to the table begging for a deal. Kasparov is absolutely right. Now is the time to ramp up pressure on Russia, force him to the table.
You can join TVP World's YouTube channel for the full episode of On the Record. Now, speaking about the possible solutions to the war in Ukraine, Gary Tabak, the former chief of staff of the NATO military liaison mission in Moscow, told TVP World that guarantees from Russia are the main issue in achieving lasting and just peace. He also believes the collective West must actively engage in rebuilding Ukraine rather than providing them with just enough aid to survive.
If Putin will guarantee that no borders will be violated for Ukraine, Putin comes and takes Crimea, what are we supposed to do? Replace it with Alaska or Greenland, maybe? It's very difficult to guarantee those things. A lot of it depends on Ukraine itself, what Ukraine is going to do, how it's going to approach the situation, how they're going to deal with a bureaucracy, how are they going to deal with corruption, how they're going to rebuild when they'll get that break, ceasefire break. How quickly will they rebuild their weapon industry, armor industry, and so forth? Of course, with our help, they should do it. And hopefully we'll be able to engage quickly enough, not like those 3 years where we're just nickeling and diming them by dripping help so they just survive.
Two watchdog companies identified a group of Russian-affiliated websites spreading propaganda abroad. Now, the alleged group was attempting to influence the results of the upcoming parliamentary elections in Germany. Now, according to analysis by NewsGuard and Corrective, some 102 websites are connected to John Mark Duggan. The outlets published content supportive of politicians and parties friendly towards Russia, like the far-right Alternative for Germany. The former American policeman who received political asylum in Russia fled the United States after similar campaigns against American politicians. In response, the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs said it's surveying the campaign, which in their eyes is aimed at undermining confidence in German public institutions. U.S. President Donald Trump has ordered the release of classified government files related to the assassination of former U.S. President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert Kennedy, and Reverend Martin Luther King Jr.
Lastly, sir, we have an executive order ordering the declassification of files relating to the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
That's a big one, huh? A lot of people are waiting for this for years, for decades. And everything will be revealed. Okay? Give that to RFK Jr.
Yes, sir.
Moving on now to the Middle East, 4 hostages held by Hamas will be released on Saturday, both Palestinian and Hebrew media report. Now, the move comes as part of the second phase of the ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. Now, on Friday, Hamas is slated to reveal the names of 4 hostages who are expected to be female civilians to be handed over back to Israel. Their release will be part of an exchange by means of which a couple dozen Palestinian prisoners will be freed as well. The ceasefire agreement was struck on 15 January. 4 days later, its first stage took effect, resulting in the first swap between Hamas and Israel. Now, by way of this first exchange, Hamas released 3 female hostages in return for 90 Palestinian women and teenagers. Romania's pro-Russian presidential candidate, Călin Georgescu, has been endorsed by the second largest opposition group in parliament, the Alliance for the Union of Romanians, also known as the AUR. Now, the party decided to rescind the candidacy of its leader, George Simion, who also stood for president in the annulled election in late November. Now, the decision comes despite major differences between the two far-right politicians, including views on NATO bases in Romania, which Georgescu opposes. The leadership of the AUR party, however, has stated that this decision aims to respect the will of the Romanian people. Georgescu won the first round of the now invalidated presidential election and was geared to square up against center-right candidate Elena Lasconi in the runoff, despite neither being tipped to enter the second round. But the ballot results were widely contested over allegations of Russian interference in favor of Georgescu, which eventually led to the country's constitutional court annulling the election. Friday marks the fifth and final day of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Now, leaders from around the globe will convene to discuss pressing topics in geopolitics, economy, and security. Relations between the United States, the European Union, and China will be at the top of the agenda on the last day of the World Economic Forum on Friday. Global figures in politics, civil society, and businesses will also touch on the subject of the challenges facing the global economy. They'll also discuss possible ways to deal with a fall in agricultural productivity, polluted waterways, and the increased frequency of droughts. The European Union abandoned plans to hold a meeting on defense policy in the Belgian countryside. Instead, the event will be held at a conference center in Brussels. Now, the European Council said the change was made after updated security evaluation of the Château de Limont country house near Liège. European officials decided to move the event to the Egmont Palace in the Belgian capital. The meeting is scheduled for February 3rd. Union workers from the Serbian state-owned electricity company took to the streets of Belgrade on Thursday evening. The workers joined students in the Serbian capital in ongoing protests sparked by a roof collapse that killed 15 people. More disruptions are on the horizon as a general strike is expected to begin today. Workers and students gathered in front of the Serbian electrical company headquarters in Belgrade. There, they observed 15 minutes of silence to honor those killed in the railway station roof collapse last November. The protests also prompted action from the U.S. Embassy in Belgrade. American officials cautioned U.S. citizens to remain vigilant and leave immediately if they see any disorderly crowds. Tens of thousands of Georgians continue filling the streets of Tbilisi as protesters keep calling for new elections. Demonstrations against the ruling Georgian Dream Party have been raging for 57 days now. This time around, the protesters gathered around the Vaso Abashidze Theater in Tbilisi after actors expressed their support for the movement, as well as those who now face criminal charges for their involvement in the protests. Opponents of the ruling government vowed to continue their riots until new elections are held. The Georgian Dream Party won the most recent parliamentary elections, a victory that was deemed fraudulent by international watchdogs and EU hopefuls inside Georgia. The Czech Republic has been at loggerheads for some time with Slovakia over intensified wolf hunting in the Beskid Mountains that stretch between the two countries. Now, a recent spike in deaths of the animal has now stoked fears that it may become endangered. A rise in wolf and bear hunting has reportedly been observed since the fourth Robert Fico government came to power. Unlike in the Czech Republic, the species is not protected by national law in Slovakia, but it is still covered by the EU's Habitats Directive, and killing wolves falls foul of the bloc-wide law. Now, fearing wolves straying across the border might be at risk, the Czech Ministry of Environment has now called on Slovakia to harmonize wolf protection measures along the two countries' shared border. Last month, the EU ended the 45 years of strict protection for gray wolves in Europe. Starting in March, each EU country will be allowed to set an animal quota of wolves to cull. And that's all for this edition of TVP World News. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching.